Okay, time for a quick sound check. Make sure everything's working. Hi folks. Hope you could also hear the hold music, which you can't hear now while I'm doing the sound check. If music, microphone, video is all working, just pop a comment in the live chat for me and then I know I'm safe to go off and brew up. So see you in a few minutes at the bottom of the hour. Bye for now. Good evening everyone, welcome to In Studio Live, the 52nd edition on week 48 of this temporary arrangement of me doing a live stream. Good evening to everyone. I've been greeting people in the live chat, so if you have access to that, then please put your name in there and I can say hi. A couple of people I missed on there. It looks like I missed John off. Hi, when I was naming other people in there. Hi, John. And since then, David and Robin have both joined. So welcome, folks. Great to have you on board, and I hope you enjoyed the hold music during the countdown. This was a discussion we were having on Wednesday. It's taken me a little while to work out how to achieve it, but we've got there. I got there in the end with it. Maybe not the world's best music for it, but at least it's music I'm not going to get a copyright claim against, because I've purchased the rights for the Dano Song stuff, which is the stuff I use on the other slideshows that I produce occasionally. So anyway, let's get underway, shall we? If you are new here, if you could do me a favour and take a moment and go and subscribe, so you get updates of new videos and new live streams, that will benefit you. If you're watching this on replay, please pop a comment into the comments field so I know that you've seen it. And if you're watching it live now, please go and hit the like button. I have a weekly challenge to try and get to 17 likes by the end of the intro. That's the highest I've got. And there's a possibility we might do it. We've got 16 people watching at the moment. So if you all go and hit the like button now, and one more person joins and hits the like button, we might just meet it this week. So go and do that now for me. Cheers. And as ever, thanks to everyone who's been sharing links to the shows. I know one or two people who've been doing it. And I got a friend request from somebody during the week who was I thought, I don't recognise that name. I'll go and have a look at their their Facebook feed before I accept the friend request. And the last thing they posted was a link to one of my live streams. So I'm sorry I've forgotten your name, but thank you for sharing it. I really appreciate all that. It's really helpful. So now, about the shows, if you are new here, let me just tell you a little bit about them. They're twice weekly. Sunday nights, so that's tonight, are tutorial and Q&A based and focused, and Wednesdays are feedback focused. So if you've got images you want me to talk about and you want feedback on, send them to feedback@ians-studio.co.uk, and I give priority to any images which have been received that way. The rest of the feedback is based on images from my my Facebook group, which this is the one where I need to change the order of them. I was doing it on Wednesday. I was trying to think, why was the order wrong? Why wasn't the order wrong? It's on this one. Right, okay, I now know, because that should lead into the slides on the Facebook group. It doesn't. It just tells you that these shows are online for a while, and I'm gradually going through, putting highlights up on YouTube, and then moving the full show up onto my Academy. I also have a little thing for if you find the shows helpful and you want to contribute to keeping them going financially, then you can buy me a cup of tea. And the system is, it's basically Buy Me a Coffee that a lot of YouTubers use. Mine's called Buy Me a Tea because I don't drink coffee, and that's the link. You can also find it down below the show. And tonight's cup of tea comes courtesy of Roger Tibbs. Cheers, Roger. Lovely, thank you very much. So if you want to say thank you that way, that's greatly appreciated. You don't have to, it's not obligatory or anything like that. I do try to say thank you by putting names on the cuppa each live stream, but I've also got a special thank you gift to go out this week. As our theme is about sunrise and sunset, I'm going to share one of my inspiration sheets. My Academy members have got the full archive of these, over 50 of them, but anyone who's in credit on cups of tea that they've given me, then I'll email this out a little bit later. So that you get the full detail, and it's basically a printed version of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, so you've got it as reference, so that you've got it as a true reminder without having to go, which live stream was it Ian was talking about sunsets? You can print it out, fold it up, stick it in your camera bag, and you've got it there next time you see a sunset. The Facebook group I was talking about, that's the link. That's where we carry on the conversation during the week. It's where I get photos from for the feedback session. Please share your photos there. We do have challenges going on there. We're coming to the end of a bingo challenge. We've already declared the winner on that. Well done, Laura. But some people are carrying on, and quite right too, because the challenge isn't about getting the prize, isn't about being the first to complete the card. It's about getting you out with your camera and encouraging you to go out with your camera. So do carry on with that. And it's also where you find out information about what's coming up as well. And how are we doing? Still 17 concurrent viewers and 13 likes. Right. Well, the 5 of you who haven't hit the like button, go and do it now, and make sure it's the thumbs up version, not the thumbs down version. The other week, 4 people hit the thumbs down one, so don't want that. Thumbs up, please. Talking about the Facebook group, we have a new cover image each week. This is the current one. It's a selfie from Peter. That will be changed tonight, Peter. You'll be glad to hear you won't be the star of your selfie. Your face will not be on the front of the group for much more than another hour. And then I will change it to another image. If you want to know what that image is, stay tuned to the end of the show and I will reveal. Will it be your image that's on there tonight? Stay tuned and find out. That's my newsletter link. It's also down below. Please sign up for that as well. So, what have we got on the show tonight? We have got a lot of Q&A actually. I'm going to do next Sunday a full Q&A session because I've got quite a lot stacked up that I need to go through. So I've got 2 Q&As that I'm going to deal with that have come in over previous weeks. And I'm going to be looking at sunrise and sunsets. That's our theme for tonight. So, have we beaten the record? 18 concurrent viewers, only 13 likes. Oh, some miserable so-and-sos out there. 5 of you don't like me. I'm hurt. No, it's all right, folks. It's all right. I'll try next week to see if we can beat it. I'm just glad that you're tuning in, to be honest, and I'm glad that you're watching. It's great to have you here with me. So let's start off with the first one of the 2 Q&As that I've been given. If you've got any that you want me to deal with live on the show tonight, stick those questions in the live chat. I'm monitoring it as we go through, and I'll try and deal with them as we go through the show. There is a little bit of a delay with the chat, just so you know. By the time you've typed it in and me seeing it, there's a discontinuity, basically because the live chat works at a different rate to the video. The video buffers before it goes out to you. So it appears from your perspective as I'm not seeing things until much later than they are. So remember there's a delay there. You can always send me questions during the week. That's the email address. Contact me at ians-studio.co.uk. And it was an email that I got this week from Bernard Robinson. And he asked, can you advise on having a sequence of checks when making a shot? And specifically, framing the shot, focusing, setting aperture or shutter speed, and setting the ISO. And he wants to know, what order do you do them in? What's the correct order? I thought this was a really interesting question. It's the sort of thing that you don't hear photographers talk about very often. I mention it sort of in passing on my my training courses, but never as a standalone item. So I thought it'd be good to go through this step by step about what's going on in the brain when I'm creating shots, to try and give you an idea of the process that I go through and the thinking that goes behind shots. Right, I'll have a look at that later. There's a message came in saying there was a typo somewhere. On that, I'll have a look at that in a moment. Right, the shooting sequence I go with. Well, Bernard, you got the right steps. You listed them in completely the reverse order to how I deal with them. And the first thing I look at, well, actually, the first thing of those steps is ISO. But before that, there's a step 0. And this is one of the most important steps for photographers. And it's to visualize your finished composition before you even pick up your camera. So if I'm wanting to create the scene that's in front of me, what I'm doing to start with is I'm thinking, well, what's it going to look like in the final image? And I'm thinking three-dimensionally when I'm doing that. You often see people doing the thumbs up like that to try and, oh, is this what it's going to look like? I tend not to do that, and I'm a bit cynical of it, because a good photographer should be able to do it all up here, all in the mind's eye, be able to look at the scene and decide where the corners are going to be in that scene, how they're going to frame it without having to put fingers up. But if that helps you as someone starting out, then do it. Work out your frame. Think, yeah, that's how it will look on there. But try to get into the idea of working out that scene before you even lift your camera up. And you look at the scene and think, right, well, that bit I want to capture, that bit I want to capture, and what's on the outsides of that, I don't. So that's my framing. Three-dimensionally, I said, I'm thinking about, well, how do I want my depth of field to be on there? Are there things I want out of focus? Are there things that must be in focus? Do I want a big depth of field? Do I want a shallow depth of field? And that's going on in my mind even before I pick up the camera to create the shot. So when I then pick up the camera, the first thing I'm then thinking about is my ISO. That's my starting point at that point, because that's the thing that controls, that probably has one of the biggest influences on the shot, because that will enable us to control how much noise there is in the image, and typically we want as little noise as possible, but also it will affect what shutter speeds and what apertures we can actually use in the final image. So I start thinking about the ISO, and I choose the lowest ISO I can get. So what do I use? What are my ISO settings? Well, my normal ISO settings are these. I normally aim for ISO 100 whenever I can, because that gives me the cleanest image possible with my cameras anyway, because that's the yes, it can go down to ISO 50, but Canon rate ISO 100 as being the cleanest standard ISO available. So that's the one I aim for. But it might be a dull, overcast overcast day, and in which case I might bump my ISO up to 200 at that point, because that gives me a bit more option with my shutter speed. I'm not forced down at slow shutter speeds. If I was inside without a flash, my starting point would be ISO 400, and that might include bracing the camera against a pillar or me leaning against something so that it's properly based. ISO 400 will be my start point with that. ISO 800 is my starting point for theatre work, and I do a couple of test shots to see what the lighting's like with ISO 800, and if necessary I move it up or move it down on there depending on how bright the lights are. So that becomes my starting point for theatre work. If I have to go up to ISO 1600, then that means it's starting to get dark. It really is a bit dull wherever I am, a lot dull actually for that. And if I've had to go up to 3200 or higher, and sometimes, yes, I do have to go higher, I must be somewhere really dark. So that's step one in the sequence. I think about what ISO I'm going to use, and I use this as my starting point for choosing the ISO that I'm going to work on. Step two is to ask myself a question. What matters about this image? This image that I've already got in my mind that I want to transfer from my mind onto the camera, what matters about it? Is it the speed or is it the aperture? Which of those is the key thing about this? Decide what's most important to you. If freezing the action is most important, then you're going to be working with your shutter speed, and that's your start point. If the thing that is most important to you is your depth of field, then you're going to start with thinking about your aperture. And that will tell you what mode you have your camera in. If your aperture is most important, you're going to be in aperture priority mode. If your shutter speed is most important, you're going to be in shutter priority. Now, I've deliberately ignored program and green square fully automatic because you haven't got any control with those either, with them anyway. I've also ignored manual at the moment because I think really if you master this with those two modes, then the manual one sort of kind of follows on from that later, slightly more there is a slightly more advanced technique on there. Right, questions come in related to what I've been talking about. Walter has asked, what's the difference between ISO and base ISO? Right, now, off the top of my head, without access to trusty Google on this one to confirm it, my understanding is that ISO is the setting that you have the camera on. It's the sensitivity to light. The base ISO is not a term I use, to be honest, so I'm slightly guessing here, but I would say that is the basic the sensitivity, the standard sensitivity. So for my 5D Mark III, I would say the base ISO is 100 because that's the start point for it. Yes, I can go down to 50. Yes, I can go to 1024,000 whatever ISO silly at the top end. But my understanding is the base ISO is the normal best ISO for the camera. I might be wrong on that. I haven't checked that answer. It's not a term I use very often. The only other place I could think of where I might have heard it, possibly with the film days, where a film would be rated for, say, ISO 100, but you could push process that, and you treat it as though you shoot everything as though it's an ISO 200, ISO 400 film, and then you change the processing, push processing, to make it behave as though it's ISO 200, 400. That's, I think, the other time I've come across the term, but it's not one I'm particularly familiar with. So a little bit of guesswork on that, Walter. If you want to tell me I'm wrong, then somebody tell me I'm wrong, please do so on that, and I will issue a correction. Right, but getting back to shooting sequence on here. So once I know what my critical factor is, whether it's my shutter speed or my aperture, and I've got the camera in the right mode, I can set that value. So if I'm looking for shallow depth of field, I might go with an f2.8. I've got that in my mind. Right, let's go for that. If I'm freezing the action, I might be thinking about a faster shutter speed, like 500th of a second, or wide depth of field. I might go up as wide as I might stop down to f16 to give me a really wide depth of field on the shot. And if I'm trying to blur the action, you know, that deliberate camera movement stuff, I might be doing half-second exposures, things like that. So I'm then setting that as part of my shooting sequence. There's then a step 2.5 on here. Once you've got your ISO set and either your shutter speed or your aperture set, depending which mode you're in, the camera will then work out the third value, whatever it is, either shutter speed or aperture, the opposite one. But there's an extra step that goes in here from those 4 points that Bernard listed. And that is to think at this stage about exposure compensation. Am I going to need to tell the camera you're wrong? And I'm looking at the scene in front of me, and if it's a snowscape, I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to need an extra 1.5 to 2 stops on there. I'll dial that in at this point, 1.5 stops exposure compensation. Or if I've got the proverbial black cat in a coal cellar with the lights off, then so everything is, sorry, a dark subject on a dark background, I think, right, I need to bring down the exposure compensation because the camera's going to try and make it brighter than it actually is. So I'm going through that process at this stage. I'm thinking about that and I'm dialing that in at this point in the thing. And I've asked myself the question, will the camera get it right? Do I need to tell it to do something other than just work it out for yourself? So once I've got that, I then come on to the final 2 steps that Bernard lists. Step 3 is focusing. And focusing comes ahead of framing for me. I've already decided what my composition is going to look like, but now I'm looking at that scene and thinking, where within that scene is going to be my critical point of focus? What's the thing that I am going to focus on? If it's a person, it's the eyes, typically. If it's a landscape, it's a third of the way into the scene, typically, for me. Or if it's a flower, it might be the stamen on there. Or it might be something else I want to highlight. I want that's got to be my critical point of focus. So I'm thinking about that at this point, and I'm then going to pick the camera up. I'm going to look through the viewfinder. Now, I always use just the center point, focus point, most of the time. This is my standard approach. Yes, I'll use all focus points. Yes, I will move it in certain circumstances, but I'm just being very generic here. For most of my shoots, I will be using that center focus point. I will move that over whatever I want to be my critical point of focus, and I will then focus on that particular item. Now, how do I do that focusing? I've got 2 slides there, the same. Right, yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah, this is what I was expecting. The 2 different ways of focusing that you might be using, well, 3, I suppose. You could be manually focusing. It takes time, it's possible, sometimes I do it. One of my lenses I have to because the autofocus doesn't work on it anymore. But if I'm getting the camera to do the focusing, I use back button focusing. Now, I love back button focusing, and that's where I take the focusing off the shutter release, and I have a button on the back of my camera that I can use. It's the AF button. I put my center point over the subject, I press that button, and the lens will go zoop, 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 and it'll lock in on it. And then I know that that focusing is not going to change. So long as I don't sway back and forwards, I'm locked in on there. If you are using the shutter release for your focus, this is the point where you half press your shutter release and you hold it half pressed. So you're using one of those 3 methods to get it focused at that point. And then you can then frame up your image. You know what your framing is going to be because you've already seen it in your mind's eye. I said that looking through the fingers, you've got it there, or thinking about, right, that's the image. So you then adjust it so that it's framed up exactly as you pictured it in your mind. So that's your step 4. You get it framed up, you look at that image and you check the edges for things, just fingers clicking off the edges, or your subject touching the edge of the frame, things like that. And just avoid those sort of things. And if you have to, then you reframe it. Maybe zoom out a little bit, maybe tilt the camera up. Check your converging verticals as you look through there. Are they tilted in? And you're doing all that at this point. And as part of that, it's just those checks just to make sure that what you're now seeing through your viewfinder matches up with that image you had in your mind's eye, and it should do. And why is all that important? The checking the edges, checking the corners. There's an old saying in photography is that if you look after the 4 corners, the middle will look after itself. So you get those 4 corners right, the rest of the image will sort itself out. Check that your horizon's straight. How often have we got horizons which are tilted when they don't want them to be? Yeah, fine if you want a quirky angle, but if you're trying to get it straight, this is the point where you're checking it. And if all that's done, if you're doing focus recompose where you've been holding your shutter release half down, now you complete the shot. If you're using back button focusing or manual focusing, now you just hit the shutter release and you have completed your shot. Now that took me a long time to talk through all of that. It took me a lot longer to describe it than it actually does to actually do it. Do I go through those steps, thinking them through one thing at a time as I'm doing it? Most of the time, no, I'll be honest with you. But then it's like driving a car. When you started to learn to drive a car, you would be going through your mind. You'd be going clutch, right, change gear, release clutch, press accelerator, and you'd be going through all those steps. Do you do that now once you've been driving for years and years? No, you just do it. It becomes second nature because you're doing it all the time. And that's how it is with me with my photography. Those sort of decisions I'm taking in a matter of seconds. I can see a scene, I'm going through, I'm doing it, and I'm doing it without thinking about it most of the time, which does mean sometimes because I'm not thinking about it, I get it wrong. And sometimes I just have to stop and think, and I have to go through it that way. So when you're starting out, go through those, well, I'll say 4 steps. There's a step 0 and a 2.5 thrown in there for good luck. But if you go through those effectively 6 steps, that will help you compose an image. Another piece of advice I was given many, many years ago when I started getting into photography was to shoot on tripod. To go out with your tripod. Not because you need it to steady your camera. It's because if you put your camera on tripod, it slows you down enough to make you think through these sort of steps and to think through all the different things which are involved with your photography. Okay, so that answers that question. Excuse me. Right. Moving on, let's talk about sunrise and sunset. This is our theme for the evening. And there's really two key areas to think about with sunrise and sunset. The things which make a huge difference between a mediocre sunset image and a great sunset image. And the two key areas that tend to get forgotten are foreground and the colour of the light. Well, really, it should be the colour of the light and then foreground on there. So the colour of the light is all to do with white balance in our photography. Oh, and we've got that buffering error. Oh, no, it's gone again. Right. So let's just take a step back and maybe very briefly talk about what white balance is all about. Now, I know most of you all know this, but for the sake of those who may not, I just want to go through it briefly. It's not a full in-depth explanation about white balance. It's just enough so that you understand where we're coming from on this. What does white balance do? Basically, white balance removes the colour cast due to the light. All light has colour, and that will affect what you are photographing. So, looking at myself at the moment, I'm wearing a grey shirt. Now, quite clearly, if you shone a red light on me, my shirt would appear to be red. If you shone a blue light on this grey shirt, it would appear to be blue. And if you wanted to illuminate me with a red light, but you wanted my shirt to appear grey, you'd need to subtract the red light from the final image. And that's what white balance does. It subtracts the colour of the light. You might say, yeah, but I'm not using red gels and blue gels. Well, every light has a colour to it. And the human eye is not very good at detecting it. In fact, actually what we've got is a very good white balance, because we can look at a scene and we can see the colour that's in front of us, almost irrespective of the light that's being shone on there. And to give you sort of a few examples, this you'll probably appreciate, that tungsten lighting, the old-fashioned light bulbs, tungsten light bulbs, have a very much an orange glow to them. Candlelight is a very, very orange glow to it. Daylight has a bluish tint to it. Shadow and shade is even bluer on that colour cast. We tend to ignore it, but the camera doesn't, and it colours the images that we are creating because of it. So, what we do to get true colour on an image, again, to get my grey shirt to appear grey, we tell the camera what the colour of the light is. And we can say, I'm shooting under tungsten. This is the white balance setting. I'm shooting under flash. Or I'm using a thing called AWB, which is auto white balance. And what auto white balance does is it tells the camera, I don't know what colour the light is, but analyse the image and have a guess, and then try and subtract that. And the algorithms that they've put in are really good at doing this, except in certain circumstances. So if you have got a scene which has got a predominantly one colour, for example here in the studio, if I'm shooting a model on a pink background or a yellow background or something like that, a coloured background, the camera sees that big area of single colour and goes, whoa, the real world doesn't look like that. I better subtract that pink, I better subtract that yellow or whatever. And that gives a strange colouring to the skin if you're in auto white balance. I think I've pulled up before the slides on that. If you want to know more about that particular item, go and have a look on my YouTube channel, and I've got a tutorial all on white balance on there in the studio, and why you use it. It's a pin-up model called Cute of Sin. I do a tutorial with her and show you the differences on there. But if you've got it set to auto white balance, the camera most of the time will analyze the scene and remove any strong color casts on there, and it's pretty darn good at doing it. That's what auto white balance is all about. The trouble is, if you want to record the color of the light, which is what sunsets and sunrises are all about, it's all about recording the color of the light. If you leave your camera on auto white balance, the camera will subtract that and give you a less than sunsetty effect. Here, for example, is an image created with auto white balance. It's not a brilliant composition, but it serves the purpose on here. That's with auto white balance, and the camera has analysed it and said, oh, there's a lot of orange in there, I better remove that, and it's taken it out. What it's supposed to look like was that, and that's when the white balance has been manually set with it. So if you're doing sunrise and sunsets, you need to get a grip of your white balance. So how do you set the white balance? Well, there's basically 4 different ways you could do it, 4 possible solutions to it. Firstly is to fix the white balance to something in camera. And the one I use is shade or cloudy white balance. I've used that, and it just tells the camera, right, don't analyze it, just if there is a color cast here, it's because I want it here, and it tries not to take too much of it out with the white balance. So you fix it at something like that. So I use shade or cloudy white balance. But basically any manual white balance will help with it on there. If you're using a compact camera, the chances are it's got a sunset mode in there, in the creative modes. And what the sunset mode does is it tells the camera, don't remove all the orange from it, leave it in there. Or you can manually set your white balance. And I've used 8000 Kelvin as a manual white balance to really push the orange effect on an image on there. So you can do that. Alternatively, if you are shooting RAW, then you can set this in Lightroom afterwards as a free change. And it is completely free if you are doing it on a RAW file. If you're doing it on a JPEG file, it does degrade your image slightly if you're doing it in post-production rather than doing it in camera. So I always recommend, if you're not, well, I always recommend shooting in RAW actually, but if you're not shooting in RAW, try and get your white balance right in camera, because that will give you the best possible results. So those are your 4 solutions to getting the right white balance to create your image. So I'll be honest, a lot of the time I will set shade or cloudy in camera, but then I will set it in Lightroom to whatever I want in post-production because it's a free change. So that's how I get the colours right for a sunset. Next thing I was thinking about with sunsets is to talk about really the foreground. What makes sunsets beautiful? Well, what makes a sunset beautiful is this huge swathe of bright colours that's in front of us, covering the whole horizon or the whole vista that's in front of us. It's the size of it, it's the scope of it all. And when we condense that down to a little image this size, it just doesn't do it justice. It loses that impact that we have from the scene in front of us. And we look at it on our camera or we look at it on our screen and go, you know what? That doesn't look half as good as what we're seeing in front of us. Well, you can help the final image by having something else of interest in there. Instead, you see what happens is they just look bland because you've lost the scale of it. But if you put some foreground in there or a point of interest in there, the colours then act as something that draws focus to that something else. And the problem is, part of the problem is we're looking at these scenes and we're going, wow, wonderful sunset. And the rules of composition just get thrown out of the window because we're blown away by the sunset that's in front of us. So the easiest thing is get something between the camera and the sunset to give that point of focus. So here we are in on the island of Bequia in the Caribbean. They have some of the most wonderful sunsets in the world there, and you can see here, imagine that shot without the boats in it. It'd be just a little bland, it's just orange. But the fact that I've got the boats towards the horizon, I've got the little tender boat going off towards them, it gives that interest to it. It makes the image work by putting that foreground interest in there. Another type of foreground interest that works really well is the idea of silhouettes with your sunsets. Now, when you're doing that, the key thing you have to remember is to concentrate on getting the exposure right for the sky. Because what's going to happen? You will have probably a large area of black within your image. That's your silhouette. And what does the camera do? It sees this large area of dark and it goes, whoa, that's underexposed. I will try and bring that up so you can see that detail. And it brings it up and it overexposes the background. So you get a washed out sunset on there, and you get detail in the foreground, which you weren't necessarily looking for because what you actually wanted was a silhouette. So this is where you're going to need exposure compensation to dial things back. Negative exposure compensation, pull it down. And if you're not sure whether you've got it right, look at your histogram. And last week, no, a couple of weeks ago, I did a session all about histograms and all about exposure compensation and how those work together. So go and have a look at those if you haven't worked, if you're still not clear on that. So the aim is make sure your sky remains deep colours on there, doesn't blow out. Yes, the sun might blow out on it, but the sky itself shouldn't. So here we go, a couple of examples on it. This is the midnight sun in Iceland on the deck of it's one of the very early CMV ships. My mind's gone blank, I can't think of the ship's name. This was not on a cruise, this was in Tenerife, going up onto onto Mount Teide there. Videographer filming the sunset, so I've got him in silhouette there. Another similar silhouette to that, or not created there, created in Crete, is that you've seen it online, I'm sure, my avatar that I've used for years and years. Just me in silhouette, and it's all the same thing. I've exposed for the sky on there to make sure that the image is right. Again, similar idea here. I've dialed back the exposure to make sure I've got that true silhouette of the figures watching the sunset, or in this case, photographing it. What about photographing people at sunset? Well, the example I'm going to give is all to do with, I've done it with a model, but this will apply with non-models as well, any people you want to shoot at sunset. It's a great time because the sunset acts as a great background, But if you use an external flash to illuminate your subject, you can do this with on-camera flash, but I find it much easier to do it with off-camera flash where everything's in manual mode, to be honest. And the aim is to balance the fading daylight with the light from the flash. Get it right and you will have an image looking like this. Now, how do I achieve that? Right, three steps. First of all, I create the image by taking a shot of the background, basically of the sunset itself in manual mode, and my aim is to keep my shutter speed below 125th of a second. And I make a note of what f-stop I'm shooting at with that. So I've got my background correctly exposed, the sunset correctly exposed at a shutter speed no faster than 125th of a second. I note the f-stop the camera is set at. I then set up my flash gun with a remote trigger, probably with some form of softbox modifier or umbrella modifier if you haven't got a softbox. And I then meter that so that the output from the flash, remember when you measure a flash output, it's measured as an F number. I measured that so that, for example, suppose my when I did the shot of the sunset at F 125th of a second, let's say the shutter speed was 125th of a second. Let's assume that the aperture was f5.6. So I set my flash gun up, I give it a mid power output, meter the light at the model pointing towards the flash gun, and it reads f8, so I know I've got to turn it down by 1 stop's worth of light, meter it again, f5.6, I can take the shot now knowing the flash will illuminate my subject, my model, correctly, and the background already was being illuminated correctly by the daylight, so they both are correctly illuminated. I might put in an additional flash at a lower power or use a reflector just to act as a fill light on there. And if you want to know what it all looks like, that shot I showed you, there is the behind the scenes view of it. And at least one person who's watching this live stream will recognize himself on that shot. Don't you, Walter? So that is the behind the scenes for it. Okay, so that's my main topic. I've done the first Q&A. I'll move on to the second Q&A, and this is something which came up a couple of times on the live stream, which I said I would go through, and it's all about watermarks. We've not got any other questions in the live chat, so I'll move straight on to that. How do you create a watermark in Lightroom? Well, I'm also going to use Photoshop to do this as well. So let's head over to Lightroom and to Photoshop. So, right, I just need to adjust some other bits of my screen as well. Hang on. Right, because I've lost the display here. That's it. Right, there we go, that's better. I've got my displays back. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about how we use Lightroom to do a simple text-based watermark. And I'm going to work with one of Gary's images. I just need to the way you work with it is if you are exporting, and you can see, excuse me, you can see Gary's already done this on this image. he's got his watermark down here at the bottom, which is fine, but I'm going to show you a problem with that if I find another one of his images. Can you see here? There is a watermark on there, but because it's a white watermark on a white background, it's not really showing up properly on there. So let's have a look at some of this in here. Suppose I was going to export this image, so I would go to the export module and come down, and now I've got my own watermarks on here. I'm just going to say no, I'll do a web one, which already hasn't got a watermark enabled for it. So I'm going to enable what? It's the scroll, that's what's doing it. Okay. I'll drag down there. That's already got one of my watermarks on there. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to Edit Watermarks and create a brand new one for here. Yeah, it's got mine in there to start with. I'm going to go over to a text one. And I just need to look up some information that that Gary gave me. Over on here. Right. Right. Okay. Live stream. No, not insights. 2 comments. Roger. Right. So Gary uses photography by Gary Platt as his text, and the font he uses is Segoe Print. Right. So let's head back to Lightroom. Come on, back to Lightroom. There we go. So I'm going to paste in his text in here, and the font, I'll try and find Segoe Print. Which I don't, there it is, Segoe Print on there. Now, what we need to sort out with this is that problem of it. I'm going to move it over to the white, move it up to the white area at the top, so it's easier to see what the problem is the drop shadow to make it more visible. Now, that's helping with it. It had it white. What we're going to do is, if I didn't have that on there, you couldn't see it at all. So the drop shadow really helps. Now, by pushing up the opacity on that will also help. Now, if we do a couple of things with this, it will help with it. I can move that around, and ideally, I want that so that it's, if it's over just on one side, watch as I bring it up, it moves. If I bring it right down on 0, that is bringing it around all sides on there. And I bring the radius out, I've now got a much larger area on there, which helps it stand out a bit. But I can only go so far with that on there. If I bring the radius back, it gets darker, which also helps it stand out. And it's a matter of finding a balance on there. And you see that will now stand out even on the white background. So if I now move that back down there, that stands out better than Gary's original one. Size-wise, I can resize that down on there, and I can control how far in it is. Can you see these lines here? Those are controlled by the inset here. Now Gary has his very, very close to the edge there. I would generally bring in just a little bit on there, but I would change your settings, Gary, to do it this particular way with the angle. It doesn't really matter what the angle is when you've got the offset set to 0, because the only thing that's controlling it is the radius. And you just want it out just a little bit on there. And again, if I make that larger so we can see it, we can see I'm actually going to use the offset at the moment just to bring it up against a dark background. It will show on light and dark backgrounds equally well. So that will help with that kind of watermark. And I just need to bring that down to a sensible size. So that's my suggestion for you, Gary, on how yours works and using those shadows on there. Now, the anchor allows you to say where it's going to go as I change the 4 corners. I can't think of any time when it wouldn't be in a corner. One of the things to ask yourself is, what's the point of having the watermark? Is the watermark there? Well, there's basically 3 reasons you could have a watermark. One is advertising, effectively, so that people can see this is one of your images. It can be there purely to protect your image, or it can be there to ward off people and to just spell out that they're not meant to do anything with it. Now, a watermark, as you've got here, Gary, with just photography by Gary Platt, to my mind is an advertising one rather than a protecting your image one, especially as you put it so close to the corner. But if you are advertising, I would make it a little bit bigger than you tend to have it on there and make it more visible using one of the methods I've got there. If it's to do with protecting your image, then you might want to consider a slightly different approach, which is, let's make it a nice big watermark. And what we do here is we bring back the opacity so that it is there, but that means nobody could use that image because it's got this watermark across it. Now, I don't like doing that. I wouldn't do it on my images that way. I would always go for a corner, and I always have my opacity all the way up, maybe not that large with it, and bring it down to a more sensible size, something like that. So that's how I would do it. Now, what I would now do, having created this watermark, I would then save it. And I save it off here, pull down the drop back, save current settings as a new preset, and I will call this one. I always prefix my presets with my initials, but on this occasion, because it's Gary's watermark, not mine, I will prefix it with Gary Platt watermark top left. And I would then say create. I would then I move it down to the bottom left, and I would say create, save current settings as new preset. And I would do Gary Platt watermark bottom left. Great. I would do the same for top right and bottom right. So I've got the full set of all 4 of them. And the reason I would do that is then when I'm coming to export an image here, and I look and think, right, let's choose a different one. Let's choose this one, and I go to export, and I think, right, okay, I need to put a watermark on there. So I think, looking at that one, this one I'd like bottom left, so I can choose the bottom left one. That's the appropriate way. And where am I going to export it to? I'm going to export it to live temp, export. It should open up Explorer. It has opened it up, but it's not in the foreground, so here it is. Oh, it didn't go to the right thing, but I'll open it up. And yeah, it kind of works on there, but it's still not as clear as it could be. This is because we need an outline to it. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show how to create a different type of watermark in Photoshop, which would work on an image like this. I'm going to do it for Richard Lovelock because he's asked, could I do one for him? I will do one for him, and I'll create it as a graphical one, and I'll show you how to use that in Lightroom. So that's the sort of approach. Yeah, right, okay, sorry, just to point out here, I'll go full screen. Here is my watermark, which does show up a little bit better than Gary's original down there. I was thinking, I didn't remember putting it in the right. So there's the one I've just created, which does show up just that little bit better than the one down there. But we can make those sort of watermarks show up even better. And the way to do that is to the graphical one. So I'm just going to close that, and I'm going to start with a new document in here. So File, New. And I'm going to start with, I tend to start actually with an A4 document, believe it or not, because I like to have this done large and then I'll size down. So if I go with something like A4 and landscape and say create. Now, I've got a background layer which I don't want, so I'm going to create a new layer and then get rid of my background layer. So I'm working on a transparent layer here, and on here I want to put something for Richard Lovelock. So I'm going to start by just creating some text on here, and the text, let me find a suitable font. Well, the font I use is Anton up here, so I'll use that. It's a nice clear font, and I'm going to say photography by Richard Lovelock on there, and it's white, which will do fine, but the size of it is way too large. So I'm just going to select that and bring the size down to 36. Yep, 36 will do nicely for this. We'll go on there. Now, it's difficult to see what that looks like on this layer. So I'm going to create 3 temporary layers underneath this. And by clicking on the plus, I can create, I've got 3 layers underneath. Now, these are purely to help me as I create this. The first one, I'm just going to reset my brushes. I'm going to fill with black. So get the, here. So I can now see it on there. The second one, reverse my brushes. And the second one, I'm going to fill with white, get rid of that. So it's white on a white background, get rid of that. And on the final one, I'm going to go with a mid-grey on it. and I'll fill it with that. Because I want to be able to check how this looks on the different the different types of background you might put it on. So it works nicely on grey, it works horribly on white, and it works nicely on black. Well, I'm going to just temporarily work on the grey background. The next thing I want to do with this is I want to put some, well, first of all, I want to correct my spelling, photography, on there. And I want to put a warning text under here. And that's going to be no use without prior permission. Is going to be my warning text on there. And I'm just going to move this around, get everything lined up on there. And, you know, looking at that, I'm just going to change the photography by to a copyright symbol. And I could do it that way. Copyright Richard Lovelock, no use without prior permission. Can I get the actual copyright symbol in there? Well, if I highlight that and, oh, I'm trying to remember where this is located now. I should have checked this before. Type, oh, I can't remember where it is. There is a cheats way of getting it, and that is to come to a browser and to search for copyright symbol, and it will turn up as a symbol there. I can just copy that, go over to here and paste it in. I've had to do that trick a few times. Now, that looks a little bit small on there, so I'm going to make that larger, 48. And in fact, I want this to line up, so I'm actually going to remove that, remove the space, and I'm going to put it on its own layer for this. So by doing that, you can see what I'm about to do. Please. If I grab Richard's name, move that up here, Control T to change the size of it, and I'm going to make it look like that. Accept that. T. Actually, I'll just grab this. No, wrong one. Grab there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to resize that manually to fit in on there. That's looking good. Now, I think Richard probably ought to have a logo, and this is actually a good illustration of a point. Now, I'm going to cheat. I can't be bothered to design a logo at the moment, so I'm going to use a custom shape for it. Now, under custom shapes, I know that Richard does a lot of wildlife photography, and in particular sea animals. So if I can find in here where the sea animals are, I can find a great image. I think it's under the 2019 ones. Aquatic animals. And I'm going to grab what that one is. It looks interesting anyway. I'm going to put it on a layer of its own. So put a new layer in, and I'm going to put it in as pixels, because that's what I'm going to want eventually. And I'm just going to, yeah, it's a whale of some description. So I'm going to bring that in. I've just realized something. Control Z. I've got my color set to grey. Don't want grey. I'm going to do this on black, because that will look as a nice contrast with the white on there. So I bring in the whale something like that, and move it as it's on its own layer, line it up nicely with the text on there. Trouble is, I think it ought to be facing the other way. I think it ought to be looking in. So what I will do on that is edit, transform, flip horizontal, so it's now facing in there. And I think we should fill in these areas with white. So reset, convert, fill, white, white, white on there. Now I think that's quite a nice logo for Richard to use as his watermark on there. Let's check how it's all going to look on those different backgrounds. Let's have a look at it on the white background. Oh dear, we've lost the text. That was expected. Well, never mind, it will work on black, won't it? Oh dear, we've lost the whale. We need this to work on all of those. And this is where the idea of drop shadows and also strokes work. So what we're going to do with these 3 text layers, and bring them all together, I'm going to start with Richard's name. I'm going to add into it a stroke, first of all, so that it stands out. Now 13 is a little high. I'm just going to move it down. It's probably at this resolution going to be about 5 or 6. And I'm looking at something that's got a reasonable amount of edge to it. So 7 seems to work nicely actually on there. Not too much, but it's enough to show it off on there. And I think a little bit of a drop shadow as well would be good. So again, drop shadow, what am I doing? Effects, drop shadow. And let's, you can see where it's put it, it's not where we want it at all. So I'm going to reset the distance all the way back down. I'm going to pull the size in and a little bit of the spread out and size out. And basically what we want to do is we just want it to give this sort of slightly darkened edge to it on there, so we can see around there. Now that looks good on there. So how does that work on the different backgrounds? So on white, we can now see Richard's name on white, so that works nicely. What about on black? Well, we know it's going to work on black, and that stands out nicely, but we've still got the problem with the other parts of it. So that's nice and easy. What we do is I hold the Alt key down and drag that onto copyright, and that copies those settings. Hold the Alt key down and drag it onto no use without prior permission. Actually, I've spelled permission wrong, haven't I? Permission on there. So that's okay. Now, do we want to do this on the whale? We could do. I could put the effects and hold the Alt key first before dragging. I could put it on there like that, which means now it doesn't work on that. And the white, well, the white works, but I don't like the glow around it, the shadow around that. Have we got a solution which will work for the whale? The answer is yes, we have. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this, would I? So let's undo the effect on on there. So that's what we've got. The solution I'm going to do on there is to actually use a different effect, and that is an outer glow. And the outer glow, we want settings, a screen, opacity, we need about 35 on there, no noise, and these settings work nicely on that. That just gives this slight glow around the edge of it, this light glow to it. So I hit OK on there. Now, look what happens. Well, works nicely, everything works nicely on white. On black, we can now still see the whale on the black. So that has worked. So now that is the watermark I'm going to use for Richard. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid or hide those layers. I'm going to crop this, and let's just clear the ratio on there. And I'm going to bring this out, down there. So that's now cropped as that. And at this point, I'm going to save the file to a PSD file. So I've got it, File, Save As. And I'm going to put this in graphics on, preferably this week's show, graphics. And I'm going to call this Richard's watermark. PSD. And the next thing I'm going to do with it is I need to create, actually I might crop this a little bit tighter, and one way to do that is edit, image trim, and we say transparent pixels and OK, and this will bring it in as tight as it will go on transparent pixels. And that's what we've got on there. I'm now going to save this as a file that we can use. So save as, and I want PNG for this. Richard's watermark PNG. Save. So that's the full resolution version. Now it can be a bit large on there because that's what, 3159 pixels. So I'm just going to resize it. And to do that, I need to merge all the layers. So highlight all those layers. Layer, merge layers. So it's all down on one layer. Eek, I've lost something there with that. No, I haven't. It is all still there. I thought I'd lost my my shadows, but I haven't because I was on the transparent layer. Now I can resize this. Use Automate, Fit Image, and I'm going to say a width of 1000 pixels. That tends to work quite nicely with Lightroom. So 1000, File, Save As, and we do this as a PNG. And we call it Richard's watermark 1000 px on there, and save. Okay. So now back over into Lightroom, and let me have a look at some of Richard's images. And I can't export many of them, to be honest, because a lot of these I have no longer got the original files for. I'm looking at what I have. I've got two here that I can export. So I'm going to go with those, go over to Export, and I'm going to do, again, those web settings that I've got, and I'm going to create a watermark. So now, edit watermarks, and here I'm going to go graphic, not text, and it asks me for a file name, and the file name I want is on my L drive, video, live stream, and we saved it under Sunsets graphics. Richard's watermark 1000 pixels, choose that, and we can see that's now appeared in the right place. Actually, I quite like the sizing on that, but if I wanted it larger, I could make it larger. You can see the whale is standing out against the background on there. I think this sort of size on that would go there. So that's great. And I'm going to save that. And this is RL watermark bottom left. Create. Done. Got the right one on there. I export. And over to here, view, preview pane, and we can see the outline of the whale on there. I could make that glow a little bit larger if I needed to, but also on something else it works just as well on there. So that is how you create a watermark in Lightroom and Photoshop that you can put on an image in the corner. So have a go yourselves, folks, and I'd be interested to see how other people create their own watermarks and logos. So I need to come back over here. I want to have a look what's been going on in chat while I've been doing that, because I don't get to see chat when I'm doing things there. I've got it here somewhere. Where's my chat window gone? You lot can see it, I can't. Right. Yeah, here we go. Right. Oh, Walter was saying what the code is for the copyright symbol. Yep. And Gary pointed out the double S in permission, which I spotted before I read it in the chat on there. So right, that's all that. Let's move on with our. We're just about at the end, actually, folks, on here. So hope you found that interesting. I've got no further questions come up in the chat on there. But I do have more Lightroom stuff on my Lightroom channel. I've got a couple more videos to come up on there in the near future. So just to finish off, thank you for watching, and for those who've taken part. Thank you to Roger for my cup of tea tonight. And anyone who's bought me a cup of tea recently or over the next week, tonight or over the next week, I'll send out the sunrise and sunset inspiration sheet with all the information I've been talking about on the show tonight on there. Richard, I will email you your watermark file shortly on that. So move on with there. And right, member photo of the week. So I'm going to change the photo at the top of the Facebook group. And this week's member photo is, it's going to be this one from Amanda, snow scene, which I quite like. And as a message just popped up on my screen, my news feed saying, Greater Manchester braced for snow. So it could well be quite appropriate for this week. So congratulations, Amanda. Hope you see this. I'll change the image shortly on the group. So whose image will it be next week? So tune in next week and find out. But before then, on Wednesday, I've got another feedback session. I'll look specifically at sunset images and try and give you advice on those and feedback on the ones you've created. Next Sunday, I'm going to do a big Q&A catch-up. I've got quite a few of them listed on the Facebook group. There's a document on there with a lot of them in. I'm not guaranteeing doing everything, but I'll try and get some of the ones which have been outstanding for a while done next Sunday. But if you've got any new questions, do fire them off to me either by email or in the Facebook group, and I can add them to the list. I won't necessarily get them all done next week, but I can get through quite a few of them. So do remember to subscribe to all my channels, the travel one, the Learn Lightroom, and of course this channel, the In Studio one. So until next time, folks, thanks for watching and keep making great photos. Bye for now. Right, this is where I do the alternative ending for the cut down version. So here goes. Thanks for watching this cut down version of In Studio Live. The full version is now over in my academy, but highlights of this and other live streams are here on this channel. So make sure you subscribe for them. And if you want the full version, come and join my academy. And in fact, it's a great way to get access to all my resources, inspiration sheets and things like that, all in there for the low price of just £6 a month or £60 a year. So follow the link, have a look at that, and I'll see you next week. And until then, thanks for watching and keep making great photos. Bye for now.